Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi, this episode is about clarity, creating organizational clarity about work, creating clarity about leadership within limits, to liberate people to be able to have the freedom to lead within those limits, and creating the necessary clarity to be able to integrate AI and grow our businesses as complex, adaptive systems within their business ecosystems. To discuss how to achieve these types of clarity, I'm delighted to be speaking with Brian Robertson, CEO and founder of GlassFrog. Brian is also the founder and partner of Holacracy One, originally developing Holacracy, an innovative, decentralized management and organizational governance system. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Sophie.
Diving right in, you don't have any place that you studied in college on your resume. Is that because you didn't do it, you didn't want to put it, or you opted out, just kind of like, this isn't for me, it's too boring, too slow, whatever?
Yeah, I dropped out of pretty much every school I've ever been in.
Okay.
I grew up coding. I learned to read on software development books.
Really?
And by the time high school just bored me, talked my way into a college scholarship, and even at an engineering college, found I already knew more than the professors about software development. So that didn't last long.
Okay, so college wasn't for you, got a scholarship. So then you are first lead architect. So why that first?
I love software. I love the structured thinking of it, the clarity. I mean, really, software is it's an art form of clarity. It's you cannot be ambiguous and vague and make it work, right? And so when I went into organizational life, it was a pretty easy path for me from initially the tech side to more the organizational leadership and management, partly because I looked at the way companies were run and I said, this is nuts from a software architect's point of view. This is not clear. This is a mess.
Okay. Right. And as an engineer, you wanted to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a straight path from that to what led to Holacracy was a lot of experimentation of, there's just got to be a better way to run things to create more organizational clarity.
You did a few years at Review Netcore. Why that next? What was it that you felt that you needed to learn there before you then started your own company, which was Tenony Software?
So that was during the .com bubble boom. And I had an opportunity to join one of those .com companies as the chief technology officer, which was a nice opportunity for me to take on a higher level management leadership role. Okay. And again, I was so fascinated about the way we humans work together. And that I only stayed there about a year before realizing if I really wanted to experiment, I needed my own company to do it. And I started my software company, I was back in 2001, as a laboratory really to experiment with how do we manage, how do we organize work? How do we evolve the expectations, the authority structure, who makes which decisions? What do we expect of each other? How do we change all those things as we learn together? So really, I turned that company into a laboratory, and it's there that Holacracy grew. That was where we pioneered initially the practices that would become Holacracy. It's an attempt to run our own company better. And then after that, we started taking it to clients, and I spun off and created Holacracy One, which was my management consulting company that spread Holacracy.
As this laboratory, which had a democracy, I read the Wall Street Journal article from 2007, which was, you all make decisions together. Why did it need to be? It needed full consensus.
No, it was actually, this was my first learning about how the press sometimes works. It was not a democracy. It wasn't at all, but they thought that would be easier for people to understand and a simpler story. So they wrote that. No, it was really an early version of Holacracy where people did have a voice, but it wasn't a voting process. It wasn't a consensus process. And Holacracy is not either. It was more, when we were changing the structure of the company, not every decision, the structure, the expectations, the who does what, the processes, the policies, the kind of foundational stuff. that everybody had a voice, but it wasn't, they didn't get to, just block something because they didn't like it or whatever. It was a chance to raise an objection, to say, hey, here's a reason why this proposed change is going to get in my way of doing my work for the company, which doesn't block it. It just gives us a puzzle to solve, right? And that really became core in what we eventually grew out of. That was a management framework that gave everyone a voice, but without the tyranny of consensus, without people being able to block things.
What were some of the ideas that you started out with that you then had to test and evolved, that bringing other people's voices and challenges and, changing what the format, the structure, the frameworks, whatever, different elements that then gave birth to something that was sort of, you said, okay, this is now ready to launch. What had to change the most, I guess, is one question.
Yeah. Part of it was just how we defined roles, right?
Okay.
Like the traditional way of doing that in a company with something like a job description, I find ironic. The job descriptions, I mean, they're out of date by the time they roll off the printer usually, right? Like how many times do you go and look something up in your job description or colleagues, right, to figure out what you should focus on? You don't, because the clarity isn't real. It's some manufactured artifact. And then meanwhile, the way things work around here bears very little resemblance often to the formal documented structure. So people have to figure it out just culturally. And yet there's an advantage to clarity. When people really know who to go to for what, everything gets faster and easier. When they know, here's the decisions I can make without talking to anyone, they can move a lot faster than when they have to call a big meeting or socialize everything. And so one of the first things we experimented with was, how do we define roles in a way that keeps them real, keeps them grounded, keeps the clarity meaningful? And to do that, it can't be a once upfront thing. It has to be a way to evolve them as we learn together, right? As we learn, hey, here's something that, didn't go as well as it could. Here's the process tweak. How do we capture that in a way that avoids the over capturing, the bureaucracy that comes when we try to document everything, right? How do we capture a minimally sufficient, just-in-time definition of how things work around here and let it evolve and change as we learn together? And so we experimented with new ways to define roles, new ways to change them over time, new ways to give people a voice, because if everyone has a voice in everything, nothing happens, nothing gets done. That's the tyranny of consensus. And on the other hand, if you have all decisions coming top down without integrating any input from others, you also have all sorts of problems. So how do we give just the right voice to make sure people can keep their area of the company safe from harm, from obstacles to them, roadblocks to them getting work done, but without requiring everybody to like everything, everybody to agree on everything? So we experimented with different decision-making methods and different ways, different meeting processes, because we also wanted far more efficient, effective meetings than most of what we had seen out there before. So we experimented with meetings, role definitions, power structure, really. How do we decide who does what and who makes which decisions with what input? So a lot of just basic experimentation with how we structure a company. And some of those experiments were terrible ideas, and some of them were great. We kept the ones that worked, changed the ones that didn't, and eventually ended up with something that we now call Holacracy.
I remember when it was implemented at Zappos. And there were many people, including, I think, the CFO, who was not too happy about it. Or somebody else who had, climbed up the ladder a bit and had got their office and did not want to be level set and, have no titles and no perceived hierarchical up-leveling over the course of their career. What are some of these dynamics that you really think were evolutions of taking it to a bigger company than the sort of experimental lab that you'd had, and are, for better or worse, those are human dynamics that are just, it just makes something as pure as Holacracy just very hard to implement?
The hardest part of doing something like Holacracy, any kind of self-management structure, is not the learning of a new way to do things. It's the unlearning of the way we're used to. Right? We actually found it was far easier to get kids right out of college, figuring out how to use this framework than really seasoned executives. Now, at the same time, the more seasoning means more wisdom and experience to bring to it, but a harder time unlearning. And part of that isn't just the unlearning intellectual skills or habits. It's changing even the way we kind of find our sense of self-worth and self-esteem in a company. When the identity is kind of roped in or tied together with the level we've reached, the status, all that, there can be a real identity challenge to something like this. And of course, that doesn't mean people don't progress in their careers. Of course they do. We develop better wisdom, more skill, and that should lead to more responsibility but there's a difference between the status trappings of that versus the actual work we're doing, right? Like what I really want to see in a company that I'm running is that as people get more experience, more wisdom, they grow into tackling harder problems and managing, more work and processes and all that, not necessarily managing other people. What I really want to see is so much clarity that we don't need to manage people. We just, people know how things work around here, and we have a way to evolve that and learn together. And expertise is used to manage hard problems, to manage the work, not the people. And that's a shift. That's a change.
It's a big shift. It was actually 2022 that I was actually speaking in Switzerland, and I encountered Pascal Dulex, who was working at Freitag, and he was in his role, he was leading and managing the implementation, so to speak, of Holacracy at the whole of across Freitag. Two things that struck me the most out of that. One was his concept, his realization that the more clarity there is, the fewer managers you need, because managers are only there because people don't have the clarity about knowing what they do. That was, it sounds so obvious, but it had not been so clear to me. And as part of that same revelation was the thing that they kept coming back to over the course of the 6 years that he'd been doing it was, what was the role of leaders? So what's your answer to that? What is the role of leaders?
Yeah.
Because we are facing that on the managerial level again.
Totally. Yeah, I find the most powerful answer I've found to that. The leader's job is to create organizational clarity, right? And to catch anything that isn't clear, to catch anything falling through the cracks. But the trap is to get so caught up in that they become this firefighter that just solves everything, and there's almost like an addiction to that. It feels good to be the one that's needed to solve everything.
I'm saving the day.
Yeah, saving the day, superhero, right? But the really good ones don't stop there. They do that when it's needed, and then they create clarity. They say, how can I never need to save the day this way again? Right? It's like if you're a parent and your 2-year-old runs out across a street, of course you're gonna be a superhero and save the day. You're gonna grab them and pull them out, not just say, well, they'll learn that lesson. But if you're still doing that when they're 20, you've missed a step as a parent.
For sure.
Like a good parent teaches them and creates the structures in them so they don't need a parent anymore. And I think that the really good leaders do that. They create other leaders, not followers, right? They create the clarity that lets people step into their full power, their full freedom, and lead. They're like entrepreneurs more than managers, if you will. Their job is to obsolete themselves. And as the company grows, that there's constantly more of that to be done. So for me, that's what a really good manager, even in a management hierarchy, does. They're not just micromanaging. They're not just calling all the shots and bossing people around. They're defining boundaries. They're defining expectations. They're empowering by creating a system, a framework that is so clear that people don't need them to empower them. They can just simply step up into the power they have because it's all obvious.
So that goes to what you described actually at running remote, the kid thing. If they know what the boundaries are, then they can go and explore because they feel safer. So how does one know how far out the boundary needs to be. Is that what I use empathy for in terms of like, how, what is Brian capable of? Where do I need to put that boundary so that he can feel comfortable that he has enough autonomy, but he's also not going to, charge off and, goodness knows what.
You cannot figure that out up front. It's too complex of an equation because it's not a single answer. It might be when doing this kind of process or in this area, then this person can have freedom up to this point, but in the other process over here, it's going to be different. So
because now we're dealing, with more and more projects, more and more non-routine work. Yeah. So this is something that has to happen each time. So this is sort of a routine exercise.
It has to adapt.
Okay.
It has to evolve. So it needs to be a learning process, right? Start with a minimally sufficient guess of the limits you need, the authorities, somebody going to whatever, and then try it and learn together, right? Did something go kind of off the ideal because there was too much freedom or too little freedom, or because of another process getting in the way? And then how do we learn how to shape the system, right? Shape the way things work. Whereas at most companies, it's very difficult for most people to have any influence on the way things work around here, the patterns of how we get work done. Or we do that only by some big consensus process, which is so inefficient. We can only do it for the biggest things. So for me, the real way to get that just the right freedom and just the right restriction is by learning together and trying things and adapting it.
Okay.
And what's right today might be totally wrong in a few months. So it's got to be a living process. Okay. Right? We've got to have a regular process for updating the boundaries.
So the process is repeatable, it's understandable, you get into the habit of it, that's not a problem, even though the work isn't routine. How are you defining roles now? Because I'm focused a lot now on this transition that we're having to go through, that AI, we talked about a little bit before we started, this transition to moving to tasks and projects and sort of focus on skills rather than the job being the unit of work. So if that's the case, we're starting to be more focused on the tasks and projects, and people don't have a job per se, but they have a role. What does a role mean to you?
Yeah. So we define with Holacracy, roles they're not the sum total of somebody's job. Somebody's job might include filling a dozen roles in many different teams, potentially. So a role is a function. It's a specific contained function.
Is execution of a skill?
Yes, or more like a business process or function that the organization needs for its purpose. Okay. And there are skills required for that typically.
Got it.
So,
okay.
For example, I'm filling a role right now in one of my organization's Holacracy spokesperson. It's something I do with a small percentage of my time, right? But it is a contained role. There's a purpose to that role. There's some authorities that role has, and there's some expectations that go with that role. And that's basically how we define a role: a purpose, some authorities or things it potentially controls, and then some expectations that go with that authority. And it's just a micro unit. So when I go on vacation, I can look at my roles, like hats I wear, and I can start handing them out. You fill this one while I'm gone. You fill that one.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yes. Because then, you can divvy it up appropriately depending on the person, and you're not dumping everything on one person.
Exactly. And because it's clear, it's easy to hand them off even as we scale, we grow, we hire somebody new. Well, they're not going to take over my entire job, but maybe they take one of 12 roles I fill and one of somebody else's roles. And we can it makes it easier to rejuggle the workload.
So it makes it much easier in that situation to also say AI can do this role.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay. So before we go further on the AI thing, when you're working with someone, you can not only prioritize, but also discuss how you can influence each other's work. So does that mean that you and I are working on a project, I'm also working on some other stuff, you're working on some other stuff, and that's how the influence works?
An example to illustrate a true story from many years ago. I was working in Holacracy One, my management consultancy, and I'm filling this spokesperson role I'm doing now. As part of that, I give a lot of talks at conferences. And we had another role called casting agent was the name of the role. And our casting agent's job was to book me for talks at conferences. And we'd get a lot of invitations. And so she'd have to, negotiate with the conference organizer. She'd build a relationship with them and plan, what kind of session, focus, all that.
Right.
And at the end of her process, she would present the opportunity to me. And sometimes I'd shoot it down. I'd say, no, I'm not going to go to that. It's the wrong market, or it's not big enough, or not worth my time, whatever. And, she felt pretty disempowered and frustrated by this because she'd often have spent a lot of time and energy kind of building this plan only for me to shoot it down at the end. So what Holacracy adds is a governance process where we can update the expectations on each other, the roles, and any policies or processes of the team. And we, in this case, both the casting agent role and the spokesperson role were in our marketing team. And so she came to the governance meeting and she made a proposal. She proposed adding an expectation onto my spokesperson role, which was that I would document the criteria that I was using to accept or reject one and then stick to it, right? so that she
I love that.
Right, yeah. And then at the beginning of her process, she could look at the criteria and she could assess for herself before investing a lot of time.
Does this work? Yeah.
And, it took in that meeting, it's a pretty disciplined decision-making process. It took 2 minutes to get that expectation added to my role. And then afterwards, she was able to turn to me and say, so when do you think you're going to have a draft of that for me by? And the interesting footnote to this story, I'm a seasoned CEO, founder, right? I founded this company. Yeah. She was our newest hire right out of college.
Oh, okay.
In what companies do you know where the newest hire out of college can add an expectation onto the founder in 2 minutes and then say, when will you have that done for me by? Right?
Beautiful.
Because it's not about her and I and the status. It's about the roles. And it's about, hey, there's something inefficient happening here for our overall team's purpose. So let's figure out what we need to expect of each other to smooth this out, right? And that kind of thing happens regularly. Right. So you're evolving your organization's process and design, and things just get smoother and smoother.
So this is more of a philosophical question. Obviously, with technology, with software development, the processes are clear. They are dictated by the work itself, and to some degree, by the people who have the mindsets to do that work. We created the production machines, we had the process and the rollout and the machines. We defined the work and what the machines had to do and where the people had to be and all those kind of things. Why haven't we designed work in other areas more clearly? Why is there such a lack of clarity? Still, It's 2025. Why?
Yeah. Clarity is hard. This is one thing I've learned doing this work for a long time. Clarity is difficult for humans. Even the simple act of clarifying, what are you going to do next towards that outcome you're working towards can require some thought work that is easy to avoid. It's it's just a different kind of thought work, a different kind of mental state.
Should we be taught this at school? I mean, is this not something that, including like budgeting and a whole bunch of other very basic things, which I think, but many people think that we should probably be taught in K through 12 or primary and secondary school. But if we're taught so many different things, why isn't this one of them? You're trying as a teacher to be incredibly clear to your students. You're trying to make sure that they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Why don't we learn that?
Clarity is hard. And I think historically, we've been able to get away. 100 years back, organizations and the environment they were in was not nearly as complex as it is today.
For sure.
And it was sufficient that there was this class of executives that did most of the clarity work.
Right.
And when your environment is fairly simple, that can work well enough. But today, the companies are complex adaptive systems in a massively complex environment. In that kind of system, clarity is not something that is only required from the top. The skill of creating organizational clarity becomes something that's valuable throughout the entire organization, or at least most.
For sure, yes.
And I think we're just catching up still. This is a new world we're in, and the level of complexity we face today.
The companies that are most easily adapting to the new to modern work, to this tech-driven operating environment, are the ones that are already have that technology mindset, already have more clarity and clarity with adaptability. Because, of course, if you do have more clarity, you can adapt more easily because you know what you were doing and you can change it and do it slightly differently. When I was interviewing Pascal, I think there were maybe 180 companies that were really operating on a purely holacracy management as a holacracy management system. I didn't see the number right today. Zappos, for example, has changed to a slightly different system. How close is it to what holacracy is, and why was that so specific for Zappos itself? And then just sort of where holacracy is now, and then I'd love to talk about Glassdoor.
Zappos, this was misreported in the press quite a bit. The idea that they changed to a different, slightly different system from Holacracy is not quite it. They called it market-based dynamics, and it was built on top of Holacracy. So they were still doing all of Holacracy, and they added something on top, which is actually ideal. That's what the whole point of Holacracy is. It's a foundation, but you got to customize your own company on top of it. And so what they did with it, which I thought was really cool, with what they called market-based dynamics, was basically go to the level of have every single team, every circle in Holacracy speak, become basically a business unit with a full P&L control. So, even the internal service teams would run like a business where they had other customers internally, and they had to generate enough revenue and income to justify the staff costs and everything going into it. So they were turning the entire company into basically a series of little micro businesses, even the more internal focused ones, and basically using more of a market-based signaling system to prioritize what teams get the most resources and budget and all that, which was really cool until eventually Tony, Amazon, after they bought him, came in and removed Tony Hsieh, the CEO, and a lot of his top team went with him. And that kind of killed a lot of what they were doing. So yeah, they took it to an entirely another level of scale with that. And Holacracy is what enabled it because of the fundamental clarity it offers internally and the ability to really structure around the work, as opposed to just the group of people and we're going to do something. Let's get really clear. What are the roles involved? What are the process flows? All that gets clarified, which is an important foundation if you're going to try something like that.
So now you then founded GlassFrog. And GlassFrog is based on the principles of Holacracy and then some. What are the key things why did it need to go further? And what are the things that you've particularly expanded on, the core things that really needed to be added into the mix in function of where we are now with this, AI powered, where we're really need to be focused on designing or redesigning knowledge work properly. You talk about structure. I always feel the word structure is too rigid in a time where everything is changing. So I'd love to sort of understand how the concept and the need for GlassFrog and how it has expanded beyond Holacracy.
Let's start with structure. It's a great segue into this. In most companies, structure is quite rigid and often in the way of the dynamic, adapting that's needed. But that's not the issue. There isn't with structure. It's with what process can change structure. My favorite example of structure is the human body. We have trillions of cells working together, and yet there's no CEO cell telling the others what to do. There's autonomy at every level, at every layer.
Very good point.
And it's constantly dynamically changing. The cells in your body right now, most of them were not there when you were born. It's constantly cycling, and we're growing. We're changing. There is not a top-down control system. There's autonomy at every layer, and yet an interconnection and a broader responsibility to the whole as well. And that's the kind of structure I think of when I think of structure now with Holacracy at play. It's a dynamic, living structure that's constantly changing to its environment to adapt. And what GlassFrog does is make all that transparent and visible, which what we found was Holacracy is it's incredible once companies have fully adopted it. and the adoption is incredibly difficult. And at least it was before. And so we've been working on making it simpler and easier. One of the main pieces of that is let's just guide people into it with software. And one of the main things we added, per se, was actually what we were able to subtract. What GlassFrog enables is start where you are with a simple management hierarchy and adopt pieces of Holacracy as you are ready to kind of build up to this. So it's not all at once change everything, which some companies that's actually the right approach for. But a lot of them, it's too much to digest.
Sure.
And GlassFrog enables this kind of more incremental path of, first, let's get a really good, clear management hierarchy. Let's add some organizational clarity. And now let's add some processes where more people can propose changes. The structure can become more living, more breathing. And then let's get yet more clarity of operational authorities and all the different pieces you can kind of layer in with GlassFrog. And then you can get AI to help with it, right? Like I found everyone in a company today, the one skill that I have yet to see a company that can't do well, everyone in every company I've ever worked with is at least good at complaining. And, and an AI,
I was not expecting you to say that. Okay. Right. Yeah.
An AI can turn complaints into proposals when it has clarity of structure and process.
Oh.
You can complain at the AI and it can say, oh, it seems like what you really want is this policy needs to be more flexible and you need to expect this thing of this role. Would that solve your concern?
And
right. And if so, let me push out the proposal through the process Holacracy allows, through the governance process, to your team. And then if they have concerns raised, then the AI can help you solve those concerns, right? So the AI, if it knows how your company functions, and this is one of the benefits of clarity, it's hard to use AI internally to companies if you don't have organizational clarity. If the way things work around here is in everyone's head, and it's not clear and it's not consistent, it's hard for an AI to work with. But when you have a clear structure, a pattern language for how we describe how things work, which is what GlassFrog provides and Holacracy provides, then AI can be trained on that, can learn that, and can help you figure out how to change things to solve whatever is not working as well as it could be.
Does it happen that once people have complained enough and had the complaint solved or felt that their complaint resulted in improvements, that they actually stop complaining as much? or are you feeding in the kind of like, oh, I must complain some more because then it actually works. I get stuff done.
One of the effects of Holacracy in general, and the AI just accelerates this, is it kind of holds up a mirror. Holacracy gives everyone pathways to take anything they sense that could be better than it is and be able to drive meaningful change with it. The goal of Holacracy is any tension sensed by anyone, anywhere in the business, needs a place to go where it can get rapidly and reliably processed into meaningful change. And when you have that, and when you're constantly looking in this mirror of, you're feeling maybe a little bit like a victim, you're complaining, and you see, oh, wait, I can actually drive change. I am more empowered than I thought. It's training people on empowerment. It's training people to step out of just the victim mindset and into a co-creator mindset, into no, I can actually drive change here. I don't need to just, complain as a victim. I can lead. So for me, it's practice at that. Holacracy it gives people that practice. You add this AI thing in GlassFrog, and it's just yet more practice at, look, if you're going to complain, let's just be really clear. It's not because you're actually a victim. It's just because how you're feeling right now, and you need to, let some steam out. That's fine.
Yeah, and AI is a little bit of your therapist, your complaining therapist. But so this is interesting because it's saying if you want to use AI effectively, you need to have some of these processes in place, and it's going to give you clarity about that. But first, you need to sort out how these decisions are made. It makes so much sense the way you're saying it that you need to sort it out at the core first. Is it ever able to happen the other way around, that it can start and sort of influence back into the core? And how do people receive that and then take that on board? Because if you haven't been making decisions in a clear way, that actually is also a big mindset shift, as we were talking about, with Holacracy before.
Yeah, it takes a particularly I think visionary leader, somebody that's done often a lot of their own just personal self-development work, that has a capacity to see and work with systems that's pretty remarkable, to come in from and realize, wow, I need a completely different way to get organizational clarity, to change the whole system, to know that that's the solution. That's a pretty rare leader. So another pathway we're seeing more and more now, especially with GlassFrog, because it enables more of an incremental, is people looking for something else, which might be some kind of, so if you're familiar with GTD, or Getting Things Done, which is David Allen's personal productivity system.
Yeah.
Holacracy is deeply compatible with that. David's been a long-term supporter. He runs his company with it. So some people now are jumping into GlassFrog because it creates a great system just for getting clarity on a team level of team GTD. It helps people just have more transparency of who's working on what projects and how do we request actions of each other and things like that. And then from there, it's kind of a natural buildup to here's another layer of clarity on top of our individual clear productivity practices, systems. Here's a team level system, and there's another layer of clarity you can add. And for other people, it's agile software development, and they're trying to make their agile software development better, and that leads them into GlassFrog.
So it's saying there's an incremental way to achieve systems thinking.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind
which
of
sounds almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
When I think about all of this, and I think about what needs to happen now, as AI is forcing us, as I said, that is forcing us to get that clarity, focus on what those tasks are, where we can put it in. We need that process. We have to get this done. So that means a new process, a new means to introduce something into the system that the whole system can take on board more incrementally.
Yes.
Fascinating. What are some of the things that you are sort of interested to see how they evolve over the next couple of years? Because there's so much change going on. And now with AI, in this specific aspect, requiring this clarity and forcing this clarity, what are some of the other things that we may not have touched upon that also come out of this that people need to be thinking about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the world of work is changing so fast, so fast. Organizational clarity, obviously, to me, that's just one of the absolute biggest, most fundamental areas for any organization to focus on. But I want to call out that there's a trap in that. If we think of just organizational clarity as a static thing, like we need to clarify how things should work.
Yes.
Period, we have a huge problem, which is we create the kind of static structure you referred to that is not going to help. It actually gets in the way of clarity.
Right.
What we really need is more of a organizational clarifying process, right? Or framework, right? How do we consistently generate clarity? Because clarity is subject to entropy. Whatever clarity we have as our business evolves will rapidly become out of date. So we need a learning process, right? A way of constantly updating the clarity. That's really one of the major needs, especially if we want to take advantage of AI, right? If we don't have organizational clarity, there's a major limit to how much we can get help. We can still, have AI help us in our job a little bit, but if we want AI to be running significant parts of the business, which is the potential here where we're headed, right? We need that clarification process, and one that AI can even use to propose changing the clarity, right, of a company. So that's one. The other is clarity is a piece, but another major piece that weaves in is, I'll say empowerment, but there's a trap here. If you need a boss who empowers you, you're in a fundamentally disempowering environment, right? There's an irony, a paradox.
I remember you saying that, yes. Yeah, and this is where your concept of self-leadership comes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question then please explain that, because I think it's very important.
How do we create environments that facilitate people finding and using real power, right? And this is like if you're a boss, manager in a traditional hierarchy, if you go to your team tomorrow and you say, "Good news, everyone, you're fully empowered," you don't get an empowered team. You get a lot of very confused people.
Yes.
Because people sense, of course, there are limits,
Yeah.
you know, and if they don't know where they are, they're going to spend a lot of time and energy looking for the limits instead of leading within them.
Right.
If you don't know your limits, you don't know your freedom. So the clarity needs to focus as much on clarifying limits so we have freedom within them. And then we need the kind of environment and the kind of culture that supports people really stepping up and being a CEO of their role, right? Saying like, hey, when I have a role, it's mine to lead. And I don't need to call the big meeting and get consensus and get buy-in from everyone because I know the limits. I know when I need to talk to someone.
Yeah.
And that means I know when I don't need to talk to anyone. I know when I can just lead and run with this in an entrepreneurial way. And so we need the kind of cultures and environments that allow people to just find and use power for that, with that clarity, right? Clarity itself is only as good as people can actually harness and use it by leading within it, right? By having that power. So it's another major piece for me. And you know, there's a lot more, but those are two really big ones for me that our current work world is calling more and more for. We need these things to survive today, to thrive today.
Brian, thank you so much. There's so much insightful stuff that you have shared in terms of understanding operations, understanding work, understanding what we don't know, understanding what we need to clarify, understanding so many things. And it's very interesting for me because I'm not a process person at all, but I really respect and understand the needs for it and understand that clarity needs process. To some degree, frameworks, whatever, that make it digestible and doable for me, because there's, you know, everybody is so different, and we need to be able to create these environments now which work for everybody across all the different dimensions. It's absolutely fascinating all that you've been doing with Holacracy, with now GlassFrog, and on and on. And this is the moment. It's so interesting to have Holacracy really come back into the fore, really exploring and needing to explore different management models and different ways of sort of understanding us as leaders in flatter organizations to be agile and to be adaptive. So thank you very, very much for your time, Brian.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
so much again to Brian Robertson, CEO and founder of GlassFrog. You can find out more about Brian on LinkedIn and go to the website at glassfrog.com. Immediate action tip. Self-leadership, supporting people to step up and be CEO of their own role, requires clarifying limits to give people the freedom to lead within those limits. If you're interested to improve your team's performance, take a look at my new course, Empowering High-Performing Teams. I also offer coaching sessions where we can discuss top priorities, pressing questions, whether that might be about managing distributed workers, leading multi-generational teams, or how to scale rapidly in the modern work environment. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, share it with a friend. You can also write a quick review wherever you watch or listen. For more curated research, information, and articles, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my new Work in Progress newsletter at flexos.work. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for watching.